Rehoboam, a king whose choices changed the course of Israel's history forever. His life was marked by power, idolatry, and humiliation, elements that resonate with our own journeys. As a leader, Rehoboam faced monumental challenges and made decisions that divided a nation. But beyond the shadows of idolatry and the pains of humiliation, there's a timeless lesson of redemption and hope. Let's dive into how this king, even in the depths of adversity, discovered that only by seeking God's way could he find true peace and restoration. This is the story of Rehoboam, the king who divided Israel. Stick around till the end of this video to learn more about Solomon's son. Subscribe to A Faithful Figures and embark on a journey through the past with lessons for today. And hit the notification bell so YouTube will recommend our videos about Bible characters. Once upon a time, in a land long ago, there was a young prince named Rehoboam. He wasn't just any prince. Rehoboam had a very special lineage. His grandfather was the great King David, the young shepherd who faced and defeated the giant Goliath with just a stone and a sling. David wasn't just a hero, he was a king loved by all the people of Israel. After David, the throne passed to his son, Solomon, Rehoboam's father. Solomon was renowned worldwide for his extraordinary wisdom. They say he asked God not for wealth or power, but for wisdom to govern the people of Israel. Thus, he became the wisest man ever, famous for his just decisions and the magnificent temple he built for God in Jerusalem. Rehoboam grew up watching his father manage a kingdom that was the center of attention for all the surrounding nations. Solomon accumulated immense treasures, built magnificent palaces, and his kingdom thrived like never before. These events formed the backdrop of Rehoboam's childhood. He lived in the height of Israel's kingdom, surrounded by wealth, splendor, and tales of heroic deeds. Rehoboam surely heard many stories about his grandfather David, the man chosen by God and who had a heart after God's own heart. He also saw up close his father Solomon's wisdom in action, whether resolving complicated disputes among his people or receiving visits from kings and queens from distant lands, all eager to hear his wise words. Life in the palace was full of learning and expectations for Rehoboam. From an early age, he knew that one day he would have to follow in the footsteps of his predecessors and lead the great people of Israel. He had everything to be a great king: David's heritage, Solomon's wisdom, and the support of a powerful and united kingdom. But Rehoboam's story, as we will see, took a very different and surprising turn. Rehoboam, a powerful name full of promises. Many people believe this name meant, the people expand, or he enlarges the people. It was as if Rehoboam's destiny was set to make the kingdom grow even more, leading Israel to new heights of glory and prosperity. Imagine being called by a name that everyone expects you to fulfill a great purpose. Every time someone said Rehoboam, there was an implicit hope of growth and expansion. But life doesn't always follow the path we expect. When Rehoboam finally became king, instead of seeing his people grow and prosper, he faced challenges that led to the kingdom's division. This mismatch between the meaning of his name and what actually happened during his reign is one of the great ironies of Rehoboam's story. Instead of uniting and expanding the people, he ended up seeing Israel split into two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This division was a milestone in Israel's history, and Rehoboam's name came to be remembered not for growth, but for division and the loss of the unity that his grandfather David and his father Solomon had built with such effort. When Rehoboam finally ascended to the throne, he faced a decisive moment that would change Israel's history forever. The kingdom of Israel was at its peak, with wealth and power that attracted the admiration and envy of many nations. But this prosperity also brought great responsibilities and challenges. Right at the start of his reign, Rehoboam faced a critical situation. The northern tribes were unhappy with his father Solomon's oppressive policies, which included heavy taxes and forced labor. They hoped the new king, Rehoboam, would bring relief and make changes to improve their lives. So, in Shechem, the leaders of these tribes gathered to discuss their concerns with the new king. Rehoboam, facing this first major test of leadership, asked for time to consult his advisors. There were two distinct groups advising him: the elders who had served his father and suggested he meet the people's demands, and the young advisors, Rehoboam's peers, who encouraged him to be even harsher and more authoritarian. Unfortunately, Rehoboam chose to listen to the young advisors. With a dismissive and provocative tone, Rehoboam told the people that he would be even more severe than his father. He used a metaphor to illustrate his decision. "My father imposed a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, I will chastise you with scorpions." This response not only showed a lack of empathy, but also a deep disconnect with the people's needs and feelings. Rehoboam's answer was disastrous. The northern tribes, outraged and disillusioned, rebelled under the leadership of Jeroboam, an exile who had returned from Egypt. This rebellion led to the division of the kingdom of Israel into two distinct kingdoms: the kingdom of Israel in the north, with Jeroboam as king, and the kingdom of Judah in the south, ruled by Rehoboam. This schism was a devastating blow. The glorious United Kingdom, built with such effort by David and expanded by Solomon, was now divided. The unification of Israel, which had been a symbol of strength and prosperity, unraveled in just a few days. Rehoboam, instead of being remembered as a king who expanded and united, became known as the king under whose rule the kingdom split. This division had deep and lasting consequences. The two parts of the kingdom followed different paths, facing new challenges and conflicts. Rehoboam's story reminds us that impulsive decisions and a lack of empathy can have disastrous consequences, even for those who inherit great legacies. Let's now dive into the environment where Rehoboam grew up, a place that had a huge influence on who he became. Imagine living in a magnificent palace, surrounded by wealth, lush gardens, and impressive buildings. But behind all this glory was a quite complicated family environment. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon, the wisest and richest king Israel ever had. Solomon was famous for his wisdom, receiving leaders from all over the world who came to hear his advice. But despite all this wisdom, Solomon made serious mistakes that had significant consequences for his family and his kingdom. One of the main causes of these problems was the large number of wives Solomon had. The Bible tells us that Solomon had 700 wives, all princesses, and 300 concubines. Many of these women came from foreign nations and brought their own gods and religious practices with them. Influenced by them, Solomon began building altars and shrines for these foreign gods. This idolatry was a serious deviation from God's ways. God had warned the Israelites against worshipping other gods, but Solomon, at the end of his life, let his heart turn away from the Lord and began adopting these idolatrous practices. He built shrines for gods like Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, among others. Growing up in this environment was a challenge for Rehoboam. He saw his father, known for his divine wisdom, turn away and start worshipping foreign gods. These idolatrous practices were not just a religious issue but also caused political and social tensions within the kingdom. The Israelites, called to be a separate people devoted to the one true God, began mingling with other nations and their religious practices. Additionally, the presence of so many wives and concubines in the palace created an environment of competition and intrigue. Each woman wanted to secure the best position for herself and her children. This tumultuous environment, full of family tensions, certainly impacted Rehoboam's upbringing. He grew up watching his father make decisions that distanced the kingdom from God and created internal divisions. This complicated family context helped shape Rehoboam's personality and decisions. When it was his turn to rule, he carried with him the influences of a home where idolatry and complex politics were present. Rehoboam's story shows us how the environment we grow up in can profoundly influence our choices and character. When Rehoboam ascended to the throne of Judah, he faced a series of challenges that tested his leadership and wisdom. The kingdom was divided, and the tensions that had built up during his father Solomon's reign were now reaching a critical point. From the beginning of his reign, Rehoboam was confronted with popular dissatisfaction. The northern tribes, led by Jeroboam, felt oppressed by Solomon's heavy tax policies and forced labor. They saw Rehoboam's rise as an opportunity for change, hoping he would ease their burdens and restore justice. However, Rehoboam did not follow the advice of the elders who recommended moderation and understanding. Instead, he chose to listen to the young advisors who encouraged him to maintain a harsh and authoritarian stance. His response to the northern tribes' demands was surprising and disastrous. Instead of granting relief, Rehoboam announced he would be even more stringent than his father. He compared the people's situation to a yoke and scourging, promising to chastise with scorpions. This arrogant and dismissive response only intensified the northern tribes' revolt, who were not willing to endure further oppression. The consequence was immediate and severe. The northern tribes seceded from Judah and formed their own kingdom, known as the Kingdom of Israel. Jeroboam became their king, thus challenging Rehoboam's authority and inaugurating a period of division and conflict between the descendants of David and the northern tribes. This division was not just political, but also religious and cultural. The northern tribes began distancing themselves from Judah's traditions and adopting distinct religious and cultural practices. For Rehoboam, this division was a harsh blow. He had hoped to unify the kingdom under his rule, but his hasty decisions and lack of understanding led to an irreparable rupture. This initial phase of Rehoboam's reign teaches important lessons about leadership and wisdom. It shows how a leader's decisions can have profound and lasting impacts on their people. Despite inheriting a powerful kingdom and an illustrious lineage, Rehoboam failed to understand and address his people's basic needs, leading to consequences that echoed through generations. With the kingdom divided and facing internal challenges, Rehoboam needed to consolidate his power and protect Judah from potential external threats. He realized that the stability of his kingdom depended not only on resolving internal disputes, but also on ensuring security against possible enemies. Immediately after the northern tribe's secession, Rehoboam faced the urgent need to strengthen Judah's defenses. He initiated an ambitious project to fortify strategic cities around Jerusalem and along the kingdom's borders. These fortifications were not just stone walls and watchtowers. They symbolized Rehoboam's determination to protect his people and territory from any threat. The fortified cities served not only as bulwarks against invasions, but also as symbols of authority and stability. Rehoboam distributed responsibilities among his sons and allies, assigning them to govern these fortified cities. This strategy was both defensive and political, ensuring the loyalty of the kingdom's internal regions. During this period, Rehoboam also invested in modernizing and expanding Judah's military forces. He assembled a considerable army from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, training them to defend their borders and maintain order within the kingdom. This military mobilization not only strengthened Rehoboam's position, but also demonstrated his determination to preserve Judah's territorial integrity. While Rehoboam focused on consolidating his defenses, he did not ignore the internal challenges that persisted. The kingdom's division had not resolved the tensions between the southern and northern tribes, and relations with Israel remained tense. However, Rehoboam's fortifications provided a solid foundation for Judah's stability during the early years of his turbulent reign. This phase of fortification and military consolidation demonstrated Rehoboam's commitment to protecting his people and maintaining order within his fragmented kingdom. His strategic decisions not only reflected his leadership skills, but also shaped the course of Judah's history during a time of great uncertainty and division. During the early years of his reign, Rehoboam and the people of Judah remained faithful to the ways of the Lord. However, over time, old influences and temptations began to emerge, leading them down a dangerous path. Slowly, idolatrous practices began to creep into the kingdom of Judah. What started as a small concession soon turned into widespread acceptance of foreign gods and pagan rituals. Sacred poles were erected, altars were built for strange deities, and even shrines were dedicated to idols that were not the God of Israel. These practices weren't just violations of the Lord's commandments, but also a betrayal of the sacred heritage that the people of Judah had maintained since the days of Moses and Joshua. The leaders, including Rehoboam, neglected their responsibility to teach and guide the people in true worship of the living God. Idolatry brought severe consequences. The Lord's anger couldn't be contained in the face of his people's unfaithfulness. The God who had delivered Israel from slavery in Egypt and led them through the desert now saw his people turning to false gods, unable to hear or save. This apostasy didn't go unnoticed by the Lord. Like a loving father who corrects his child, God sent warnings through prophets like Elijah and Elisha, calling Judah to repentance. But even in the face of these warnings, the nation continued to sink deeper into idolatry and immorality. Thus, idolatry cast a dark shadow over Rehoboam's reign, clouding his leadership ability and undermining Judah's spiritual and moral stability. What began as a slight betrayal of the Lord's commandments eventually turned into full-blown rebellion against his righteous rule. This turbulent phase in Judah's history serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of remaining faithful to the ways of the Lord and the seriousness of the consequences of turning to practices that displease God. The story of Rehoboam and Judah's fall into idolatry is a warning for all generations, a caution against the dangers of straying from divine truth and justice. In the 5th year of Rehoboam's reign, a dark shadow loomed over the kingdom of Judah. Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt, a powerful military leader of the time, decided to take advantage of Judah's political and economic fragility to expand his own empire. With a vast and determined army, Shishak marched towards Jerusalem, the capital of Judah. The Egyptian invasion wasn't just a military attack, but a severe test of Judah's weakness and vulnerability. The newly fortified cities that Rehoboam had built with such effort proved inadequate against the might of the Egyptian army. Shishak's soldiers conquered city after city, devastating everything in their path until they reached the gates of Jerusalem. For Rehoboam and his people, the invasion's impact was devastating. The Egyptian army not only plundered the cities and villages around Jerusalem, but also looted the treasures of the Lord's temple and the royal palace. The gold and sacred objects, which had been guarded with such zeal and reverence, were taken away as spoils of war. Rehoboam's humiliation couldn't have been greater. He witnessed firsthand the glory of his kingdom being shattered by foreign invaders. The defenses he had seen as symbols of power and security now seemed insignificant in the face of Pharaoh Shishak's fury. Yet, amidst the desolation and despair, a warning voice echoed among the people. A prophet of the Lord arose, reminding Rehoboam and the inhabitants of Jerusalem of the promises and commandments of the God of Israel. He called the king and his people to repentance, urging them to return to the covenant their ancestors had made with the Lord. In the face of this divine intervention, Rehoboam and the leaders of Judah acknowledged the gravity of their apostasy. They humbled themselves before God, seeking forgiveness and mercy for their sins. In response to their sincere pleas, the Lord had compassion on them and decided not to destroy Jerusalem completely. The city was spared total destruction, but not the humiliation and oppression that followed from Egypt. Shishak's invasion was a turning point in the history of Rehoboam and Judah. It marked the beginning of an era of decline and instability, and served as a severe reminder of the consequences of disobedience and idolatry. From this moment on, the greatness and prosperity that Judah had enjoyed under David and Solomon began to fade quickly. This story of invasion and humiliation echoes through the centuries, reminding us of the fragility of human strength in the face of God's power. It reminds us that no kingdom or empire is immune to the consequences of turning away from the ways of the Lord. After the devastation caused by the Egyptian invasion, Rehoboam and the people of Judah faced a period of deep humiliation and repentance. Jerusalem, though spared from complete destruction, remained under the shadow of Egyptian oppression. The sacred treasures had been plundered, the city's walls were damaged, and confidence in Judah's military power was shaken. In this context of despair and pain, Rehoboam and the leaders of Judah turned to the Lord seeking forgiveness and mercy. Acknowledging their guilt and the severity of their sins, they humbled themselves before God, asking Him to restore not only the physical city but also the spiritual integrity of the people. The prophet of the Lord, whose words had called Judah to repentance, continued to instruct Rehoboam in the ways of God. He encouraged the king to lead his people back to the covenant established with the Lord in the days of Moses and Joshua. This covenant, based on obedience and exclusive worship of the living God, was the only true source of protection and prosperity for Judah. With broken and contrite hearts, Rehoboam and the inhabitants of Jerusalem dedicated themselves to restoring faith and devotion to the Lord. Idolatrous altars were destroyed, sacred poles were torn down, and places of worship to foreign gods were abandoned. In their place, they renewed the sacrifices and celebrations to the God of their fathers, seeking reconciliation with Him in spirit and truth. The Lord, in His mercy, heard their pleas. He saw the sincerity of Rehoboam's and Judah's repentance and decided not to allow his city to be completely destroyed. Instead, He promised protection and provision, even under the shadow of foreign oppression. For Rehoboam, this period of humiliation and repentance was a point of personal and spiritual transformation. He learned, in the hardest way, the importance of following the Lord's ways and leading his people with wisdom and integrity. His decisions not only shaped the destiny of Judah, but also left a legacy of learning about the dangers of disobedience and idolatry. This story of humiliation and repentance in Judah continues to resonate as a powerful reminder of God's grace and justice. It teaches us that, even in the darkest moments of our personal and collective history, the Lord is ready to forgive and restore those who turn to him with a sincere heart. After the tumultuous events of his reign, Rehoboam left a mixed legacy in the history of Judah. Although he demonstrated obedience to the Lord in critical moments, his leadership was marked by decisions that displeased God and brought lasting consequences to his people. Rehoboam ruled Judah for 17 years, a period characterized by internal and external challenges. His attempt to reassert authority over the rebellious northern tribes through military force was thwarted by divine intervention, making it clear that the kingdom's division was an expression of God's will. Throughout his reign, Rehoboam faced the constant threat of external enemies, including Egypt under Pharaoh Shishak, who invaded Judah and plundered Jerusalem. This event not only humiliated Rehoboam but also significantly weakened Judah's military and economic power, symbolizing the fall of the glory that the kingdom had enjoyed under Solomon's reign. Despite his mistakes and failures, Rehoboam was not completely devoid of merits. In times of crisis, he demonstrated obedience to God's voice, preventing divine wrath from being fully unleashed on his kingdom. This reveals an aspect of his personality, the willingness to listen and respond to spiritual guidance, even if belatedly. After his death, Rehoboam was buried in the city of David, resting alongside his ancestors. His son Abijah ascended to the throne of Judah, continuing the royal lineage established by David and Solomon. Rehoboam's legacy, though marked by turmoil and failures, served as a lasting reminder of the importance of wisdom, humility, and faithfulness to God in leading a people. This story of Rehoboam teaches us that, even in the most challenging circumstances, God is willing to forgive and restore those who turn to him with a sincere heart. It also reminds us that the decisions we make have impacts that echo through generations, shaping not only our own destiny but also that of those around us. What lesson do you take from Rehoboam's story? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts. Until the next update.